verses, as you remember, on slavery. And the question we answered was, does the Bible promote, or did it start, or does it support slavery? And the slavery that we read and talked about was really indentured servants. It was not forever. It was a limited time. They had limited power after 6 years, and they went out not like some poor slave that had nothing. And really, the slavery in our country, even though our forefathers used the Bible to say, hey, God okay slavery, look at here, they didn't read it. Had they done it, they would have been different. And especially, I think what almost made slavery worse in our country is when the black people were set free. They had nothing, they owned nothing, and many of them were far worse off not being slaves because they couldn't vote, they couldn't buy property, people were embittered and didn't want to give them jobs. And that even made it doubly worse. It really did. And so again, here you can see that God said, hey, remember when you left Egypt? I made them give you wealth. So when you are sending somebody out after 6 years, do not be greedy, but quite the opposite. Lavish on them. And he talks about it in Deuteronomy, how you need to store it up ahead of time. Because the year they may leave may be a bad year, right? And you might say, well, I would really give you a lot of stuff, but this is a bad year for me. So this is why it had to be thought of every year for the whole 6 years. And again, it's interesting if you look into the Jewish documents on how they actually did it. We talked about that a bit, that one man couldn't decide who would be a slave. It would take the whole elders of the community would alone decide. And no man could just choose himself to be a slave owner. It was select honorable men in the community that only could do it. And again, we saw that the treatment, very often, they wouldn't want to go free. Best version of me is being under your authority. And of course, we get that picture saying the best version of me, Jesus, is being under your authority. The best version that I'll ever be is submitted to you. Your will be done. And Jesus said, why do you call me Lord? Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say. Somebody who calls somebody Lord, you don't have to call them Lord. If you just do what they say, they are your Lord. And so again here, this is the point that we gladly, as all the apostles did, said, I am a bondservant of Jesus Christ. Now we look at this verse 7 through 11, and it's talking about female slaves. If a man sells his daughter, in particular, a daughter, to be a female slave, she shall not go out as a male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food. The word there, food, is literally the word meat of what you would give somebody who wasn't a slave. So you can't give them slave food, in other words. Nor her clothing, nor her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three things, then she shall go free without paying money. So again, just like in the first 6 verses, the one thing that was totally different from any slavery in the world is that God built in protections for the slave. And we're going to see some more of that tonight. But really, we wouldn't call this slavery at all, would we? I mean, it doesn't even come close. These are the words that they used, but really, it was sort of arranged marriage is what it was. But it was a marriage that wouldn't happen for a while. That's the difference. So it's like, okay, she can go live with you in your house, And she's sort of like your daughter until you decide to marry her. So again, in this culture, very possibly it would be a much older man, and he sees a girl that he likes, and her father can become wealthy. He keeps the dowry rather than her getting the dowry. So it's like, hey, I'll sell my daughter because I need the money. I'm going bankrupt or whatever. So typically, the father would hold the dowry for the daughter. So if her husband died, she had finances to take care of herself and her kids the rest of her life. But in this case, the father got the dowry, so that was the advantage to him. But the young girl would come into the home, and so now he can raise her up. It's like, here's how you get a good wife. You get her when she's a child and raise her. Now, when you're my wife someday, here's how it's going to be. I'm not saying it's a good idea, okay? I'm just saying this is the culture of this time. A lot of strange things in these cultures. But nevertheless, if he can't wait and he sees another lady and he decides to get married and he decides not to marry this girl, then he's got to give her to the son. Or maybe that's why he got her originally, for the son. But either way, it's got to stay in the family. He can't ship her outside the family. And he cannot arrange another marriage for her with somebody else. She's got to be free. She goes back. The guy loses the dowry. She goes back to her father's house. And while she's there, so maybe, she was cute when she was 12, and now he's ready to marry her at 16. And it's like, I don't think she's attractive anymore. Or she's rebellious and she's not a very good wife. Or I don't want to have to stay married to this forever. I don't want to marry her, whatever reason. He can't say, well, just put her out there with the slaves and let her eat the slave food and give her clothes like the slaves or whatever. Can't be done. She remains in the house as a daughter, as a child, with the food of the household. She cannot be diminished. Definitely, you can't sell her to a foreigner. And if these obligations are not met, the household has failed her, and she returns home to her father. And so again, we see that there's some serious protections which women did not have in this society, especially women who the dowry was already paid on them. She was a prisoner. I don't know if you've heard about all the young girls in Iran. Have you heard about this? There's literally hundreds of thousands of them. Where in the Iranian culture, they'll marry this girl at 12, start having sex with her, all of that. But then the guy decides he doesn't want her anymore. He goes and pays money to the mufti, and he says, here's a divorce certificate. He kicks her out of the house. She has kids. He kicks those out of the house. She can't work. She can't have a job. The parents can't take her home. She's unclean. She's defiled. Her parents won't take her back. Her village won't recognize her. She's literally on the streets. And if she wants to eat or feed her kids, she's got to be a prostitute. There is absolutely nothing else in that society she can do. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. And so many of them, to try to cope in this, there's a documentary on it. I mean, it's like this 14-year-old girl with this 2-year-old baby. And it's like, okay. And they just, to cope, they get on drugs and stuff as well. And even the prostitution doesn't pay them very much. They take a lot of advantage of them, and they can pay them pennies because they know how desperate they are. And it's really not even enough money to live on in poverty. Heartbreaking. And this is the Arab culture, if you would, not too far off what they would have been experiencing at this time in this society as well. Well, we got a long ways to go, so let's keep going. Verse 12, he who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. Now, as we go on, this is talking about premeditated murder, a planned murder. We're going to see in just a second, in verse 13 and 14, involuntary murder. But here, this is where I want to kill this guy, and you plan it, and you lie in wait, and you murder him. And he just says he's got to be put to death. Now, let me just make a note here. Every society, one has to have punishments fitting the crime. If you do not have punishments fitting the crime, you will have more of that crime. They have done studies. There's several of them. Another one just came out recently. I believe the guy's name was Larson who put it out. But 100% of guys that look like they're going to lose the case for murder, they will plead guilty so they don't get the death penalty. 100% of guys going to prison are terrified of the death penalty. They'll do anything not to have the death penalty. And in this particular study, he pointed out that they estimate when a person is actually put to death, they have stopped 18 murders that would have happened. They explain how they get there in this. But when a guy gets life sentence for murder, it doesn't stop any. Because the punishment, even if it's a life sentence, does not fit the crime. And in the Hebrew culture, and really all the cultures this time, they had no prisons. They didn't exist. As a matter of fact, we're going to go on and continue studying the law, and we'll see that they had nighttime, they had sort of a jail you could put them in, but the next morning, they were on trial, okay? And when they were found guilty, they killed them right there on the spot, okay? And so first you have to have punishment that fit the crime. And of course, prisons, guys, do not work. For as long as I have been an adult and we're a prison citizen, 85% of guys who go to prison will reoffend when they get out, almost always a worse crime than what they went in for. They in essence become hardened. To survive in prison, you've got to become very mean. Your concept of human life and the value of human life gets degraded. And you are also taught the mind of a criminal. So if you committed a crime, say drunk driving or whatever, the time you get out of prison, you will be a trained criminal in many different ways of how to commit crimes. So the whole concept of a prison system doesn't work. We also know that you got to keep building more prisons. You just never, it's an endless need of prisons. So every once in a while, the pure geniuses of a state like California will say, the prisons are too full. We should just let some of these guys out. And what happens? Get murdered and raped and all kinds of horrible things. Well, we thought that now that they're educated, they got 3 doctorates while they were in prison, that they would, be a good citizen now. Prisons do not cause anybody's values to get better. Okay? Now, I'm not saying they're not those handful of exception rules where people are, get religion or get education or whatever and change their ways, okay? I understand there is a very small percentage of that. But I worked in the prison for 4 years as a chaplain, and some of the strongest Christians in there is guys that I discipled for years, some of them 4 years, basically a pastor's college and then a seminary I provided for them. And like I said, they had been walking with the Lord for 17, 25 years in the prison. And they made it not even a week on the outside. It was heartbreaking the first time it happened. It just literally, I'm watching the news, and for whatever reason, there is my disciple. And he's being arrested in Bakersfield for shooting a guy at a gas station. And he wasn't even in for murder or anything like that. Absolutely shocking. And when it happened after that, guys getting out, not making it, it didn't surprise me. And even the guys that did get out, they were they had a weird view of life. Even Christians love the Lord. They couldn't get that prison mindset out of their head. It was, I can't say anything good about prisons because there really isn't any advantage to that. If you have a punishment that fits a crime, if you go back in time before prisons, what did you have? Almost every serious crime was a death penalty. Rape, put them to death. You can go on down the line. A certain amount of money they steal, death sentence. I'm saying these things stopped people in their tracks from doing it. I mean, I've had people tell me they've gone to Dubai and Saudi Arabia, and a guy who owns a jewelry shop will have it out on a table, have, $3 million of gold and diamonds, and he goes to lunch, and nobody's there to even watch the table. But nobody touches it, because you touch it, you get your hand cut off at minimum, and most likely you're going to get put to death if you steal very much of it. So yeah, it's a punishment, or even in this case, probably more of a punishment than they should get. Not quite justice, maybe overkill on that. But nevertheless, so it's got to be punishment that fits a crime. Laws don't make us better people. Laws suppress the evil in all of us. We're all selfish. We all want, to spend $1 and get $10 worth of stuff. It is amazing how many people, even our Christians, will, be in a moral situation. What do you do? And to see them go in the wrong direction. If you're at a grocery and you have some drinks in your basket underneath, and the lady checking you out doesn't see it, do you go, I just got $30 off, and walk out of the store? You tell her, hey, I got some drinks underneath there you didn't get. What do you do in that situation? If you find a wallet, what do you do? Take the cash out of it and then hand it back? Again, we all have this greediness, this selfishness, and laws do suppress the evil in all of us. And then thirdly, the punishment has to be carried out quickly. It does not divert, it does not help stop crime if it's not carried out quickly. So you think in our system today, okay, if I murder the guy, first they got to catch me. Then they got to get evidence. And then it's going to be years from now before I ever go to trial. And even then, it's got to be 100% of 12 jurors. And as angry as I am with this guy, as much as I want him murdered, I think the odds are in my favor to get away with it. Okay? That's the way we think. So it's really not a strong deterrent. Worst case scenario, I go to prison. And you can make a pretty good life in there, I guess, if I get caught. But that's the severest. And even then, it's probably not life, right? I mean, they have people, you got life in prison, and then he's out in 9 years. You're going, how did that happen? You got this taken off for this, and that taken off for that, and good behavior. So, yeah, people know it doesn't deter it. And so we have more of it. Then now you have so many murders, you're going to start getting them wrong, and you're not going to have a ability. So in premeditated murder, the Bible is emphatic here. Back in Genesis 9:6, he says there, sort of a law before the law, talking to Moses here, he said, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For the image of God he has made man. Now, it explains here, but also in Numbers 35, that if a man is premeditated, put to death, and it doesn't get punished with the death penalty, then there is a spiritual corruption that happens to the land. Interesting. So people today say, how did we get here? How did we get to this place that our country is so corrupt, and you can get thrown in jail for getting somebody's pronoun wrong, or get fired because you said him when she was, had transitioned to a her, and now, she's afraid of you because that's a crime. That's violence against transgendered. Saying him when I should have said her is violence. Yeah, that's violence against a transgender person. You're prejudiced, racist, whatever. So again, you say, how did we get here? Well, I think this might be it. I think right now we're looking at a whole world where there are literally thousands, millions of murders that have gone without justice. And every time there's a murder without a person being put to death, the land, Numbers 35 tells us, it is defiled. So he says, you must put a person to death. Now, there is a process for this. In Deuteronomy 17, verse 6 and 7, he says you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses. If only one person witnessed, it's not enough to have a trial. It can't be done. But if there's 2 or 3 people that witness this, then that guy gets put to death. Now remember, one of the 10 Commandments is don't bear false witness, referring to this situation right here. Bearing false witness or lying. It's about when you're testifying as a witness. And in Proverbs 6, he says there's 6 things I hate. The 7th is abomination. And 2 of those 7 things is lying and bearing false witness. So God says, man, these witnesses have a lot of power. Because, you could literally say, you don't have to kill that guy. The 3 of us are drinking buddies here. We'll all get together and we'll kill some guy and say he murdered him, and they'll put him to death for us or whatever. Blame some murder on him. Some guy was found dead out in the woods. Looks like, a tree fell on him. We'll say, no, it didn't happen. We'll get together and agree that guy knocked a tree on him and he'll get put to death. Again, in Romans chapter 13, Paul makes it clear that those in authority are there in authority for this very reason, to be avengers, to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And so people say, I think that we've got to be merciful. I understand. There is time to give mercy, but God makes it clear when it comes to premeditated murder, there can never be any mercy shown. It is 100% the death penalty. Nothing else will do. Well, now in verse 13 and 14, however, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. Now, we're going to talk about this much later when we talk about the cities of refuge. But just make a note in that. If a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor, however, to kill him by treachery, you shall not take him from my altar that he may die. So he basically says here there's no other out if it's premeditated. Now, we're going to discover something here as we go on through the scripture. And in a few places, but Numbers 35 verse 6 is one of them. If it's an accidental death. So the idea is, the one they actually give, is if a guy is chopping a tree, and you've got a responsibility to make sure everybody's safe around you and nobody's behind you, and that this axe head is securely on there. But you're not being as responsible as you should, and that axe head flies off and hits another guy and kills him. It could be your brother, it could be your best friend, it could be a totally random kid just running by. Now, it wasn't premeditated. It was an accidental, okay? But in this culture, it is wrong, but God says it exists, and I have to help protect people. They had what was called the avenger of blood. for whatever reason, doesn't make sense. The Bible it definitely didn't come from the Scripture. But let's say my best friend, the axe head hits him and kills him. His family, in order to save face in the community, have to kill me. Doesn't matter. You killed my brother, I've got to kill you. So the Bible created 6 locations, 6 cities of refuge. This is also where the priests would live, and they had property on the outside of the wall for gardening and their own animals and stuff. But you would just hightail it to these cities of refuge. And once you got into the sphere, just right outside the gates, right outside the walls, then you were protected. And the family said, hey, he's in the city of refuge. You can't leave there ever until the high priest dies, then you're free. So you're sort of under house arrest, or in this case, under city arrest. You can never leave the city. You got to stay inside that city until the high priest dies. Now, the high priest just got a new high priest. He's a young man. He probably won't die for 70 years. But if you have some 90-year-old high priest already, you're like, hey, I'm just here a few years and I can get out. And we're going to talk more about this later. But the other thing was, in the other cultures, all cultures, if you went to the religious place, the temple, and you grabbed onto the horns of some altar, that's a place of sanctuary. You can't kill somebody in the temple. You definitely can't kill them as long as they're holding onto the horns of the altar. So later on, we'll see Joab, David's wicked general. He was a horrible guy. David tried to fire him so many times. He was never successful. And David died. He told Solomon, kill that guy. He's a horrible, evil man. I tried to fire him as my general, never could. But in 1 Kings 2, Joab does this very thing. He runs into the temple and grabs a hold of the horns. And Solomon says, rip him off of there. And they're like, hold it, though. It's in the temple. And holding on to the horns of the altar. That's a universal standard of it's a free place. Sort of like the Vatican City today, I guess, you know. As long as you're in the Vatican City, nobody can touch you, that kind of thing. And Solomon said, nope, not true. He's been a murderer. He has murdered a lot of guys. And so we can put him to death. But God makes it clear that you are to show no mercy to that first-degree murder. But the second-degree murder, I'll help you out with that. But again, it doesn't really give you a chance to say what would actually be the punishment of an unintentional murder or manslaughter. And we're going to see sort of something in between that here in just a second of how that might look. So, verse 15, and he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Now, earlier when it says strikes a man, it talked about murdering him. So this might be talking about murdering your parents, but I don't think so. I think he's talking about you just rebelliously hit your parents. He says you shall be put to death. Now, I might remind you, the 10 Commandments, chapter 20, verse 12, it says, honor your father and mother and you'll live a long life. Well, we see what happens if you don't honor them. You have a very short life. And then kidnapping in verse 16. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he's just found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. So he says, concerning kidnapping, any part of it around you, everybody has a death penalty. Well, I didn't kidnap the guy, but my friend asked if he could put something in my shed. I didn't ask what he put out there, but it's people. Well, yeah, it wasn't me. Is that your shed? Then you're guilty of kidnapping. Or maybe you're just storing them for a couple of days. Or maybe you're just the salesman. I didn't kidnap anybody, but I did help arrange the sale of it. Any part of it, whether you're a kidnapper, whether you're holding them for a moment or for a day or for a week, or if you're part of the selling process, any part of it, death penalty. And again, today, if we had such laws, They were clear, they were unchangeable, they were swift, immediate sentences. You would stop this kidnapping, this sex slavery, and immediately stop him right in the bud if that were the case. Verse 17 goes back to the parents thing. If he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So it was almost like, yeah, you can't strike them. Oh, hold it. If you curse them even, you're put to death. So, hey, let's talk about this a minute here. Not just striking them. You could be, oh, okay, so what's the punishment if you curse at them? You yell at them. You scream at them. You tell them to get out of the room and slam the door behind them. What happens to the child then? So he says they're to be put to death for anything like that. Now, in Deuteronomy 21, verse 18 to 21, let me read this real quick. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or his mother, the voice of his mother, who, when he have chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of the city. Now notice, he brings him out to the elders, to the gate of the city where the elders sit. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn, rebellious, and will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Think you'd have rebellious teenagers in that society? I do not think so. But here's a couple things to take a note. All the cultures of this time, even the Roman culture of Paul's time, a dad had the complete power over everybody in his family. If a slave was out of line, he could kill the slave. If one of his kids was out of line, he could kill his kid. If his wife was out of line, he could kill his wife. He was the master of his home. He had complete power to put anybody to death. That's the way the societies were at this time. But what happens? So the time we get to Deuteronomy, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, says, no, I did not say that parents can kill their kids. I said that it is a process that the community has to make that decision. And the community has to enact the death penalty together. So this is an interesting thing, because the community makes the decision, and then the community, flips the switch, so to speak, on the death penalty by all together stoning him with stones. Now, I just want to stop here a minute and talk in a broader sense. It's like, Bryan, this is easy. Jaywalking, put him to death. He threw a piece of paper out the car window, put him to death. That's what it sounds like to this point. Tonight we're going to see some other venues. Why is the death sentence seem to be the fallback on this side? Now, people make fun of the Bible this way, don't they? Oh, the Bible, man, you carried out the Bible, everybody would be dead the time they're 15. You hear people saying all kinds of stuff. Well, let me just say that this is God who made us, who sees sin for what it really is, who sees the heart for what it really is, and says, it may seem severe to you, but it's not. You go to Revelation 21, right at the top of the list of those who are cast into the lake of fire is cowards, number one, and unbelieving, number two. And then he goes on to murderers and rapists, and he gives a list of all the other stuff. But it was interesting that the things that were angering the Lord the most wasn't the child molester, that's down the list. It was the coward and the unbeliever who just rejected the lovely gospel. In other words, God's saying, rejecting my son who paid for your sins on the cross. That's the most offensive thing to me. And you people knowing that's the truth, but yet you would take the mark of the beast or would bow your knee and proclaim Caesar as Lord so you don't get the death penalty. That's equally as upsetting to me. So when we say, here in Deuteronomy 21, it says, so if a man has a stubborn or rebellious son, how evil is that to us? How evil is that to God? Well, remember that story of Saul? When he was to go to the Amalekites, and God said, these are the guys that attacked you on the way out of Egypt, and you fought against them, but I said one day you're going to wipe them off the face of the earth. Saul, this is the time in history. Go do it. Go wipe them all out. Don't leave any of them alive, not even their animals. Kill everything. Wipe it out. Well, Saul didn't do it, but he said he did it. Samuel's like, why didn't you do what God said? Oh, he did. Well, I hear the pleading of sheep. Oh, well, the people, they kept the best so we can sacrifice it to God. Quick thinking, total lie. And what does Samuel say the heart of Saul is for doing this? Being stubborn and rebellious? Notice in 1 Samuel 15:23, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Stubbornness is as the iniquity of idolatry. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, God has rejected you from being king. So God who looks on the heart, and God who judges from the heart, as much as the outward actions, but the outward actions can be deceiving. Some Girl Scout comes to the door, and I've been feeling guilty all week for the kind of dad I was, and I haven't talked to my kids in 10 years and feeling guilty about it. And some Girl Scout cookie comes, and I buy $300 worth of Girl Scout cookies, and they praise me and give me a prize. You're the most wonderful person in the world. But my motivation wasn't to help the Girl Scouts. I could care less about them. It was all about selfishly trying to make me feel better about myself. So when God's judging me for buying all those Girl Scout cookies, I don't think I'm going to get any prize. In the same way, somebody may murder another person, and God knows their heart in that. Okay? But here he makes it clear that a couple of the things that you may see as, well, kids will be kids, boys will be boys, every teenager's like that. And God says, somebody who says, I know there's a God and I hate you, I'm going to side with Satan and find how to have powers of Satan to hurt your human beings on this earth, especially those who are Christians. That's about the wickedest heart you can get. He says that's the same thing when I look at a rebellious heart. Or somebody bowing down, worshiping some idol. That's the same heart as a stubborn person. So God judges righteously. So again, when we say, well, God says the death penalty for that, okay, forget it in our society. We reject God, we reject your sense of justice. Okay, we'll bear the responsibility for that. But let's, as Christians studying the Bible, let's say to one another, God is telling us his nature. God is telling us his heart on the matter. We can say, well, that doesn't play in America, in our society. Okay, then it doesn't play. I mean, the Bible's not saying we have to take the civil laws of the Old Testament and apply them to our country. Now, I think that as we study through these 3 chapters, what we learn is there's a sense of fairness that I think every civil government in the world used that sense of fairness would have the blessings of that fairness. And whatever they tell you, the truth is our forefathers took these very same chapters, and you can read the materials from a group called the Wall Builders. And they go through and they look at all of our forefathers and how they came up with the various laws. And they show how they looked in the Bible and how they were having debates in Congress over the Bible scriptures. It says this, it says this. What is the sense of fairness? And they pulled it all out of the Bible. Yes, even people like Benjamin Franklin and other deists, they still use the Bible as a sense of fairness in the civil laws, even though they weren't Christians or Jews or anything else. And so, again, parents didn't have the right to kill their children like all societies around. Kids were protected, and it had to be something decided on in the community. Most likely what really happened is when the kid was dragged out there and the whole council was there looking at them and listening to the parents, and the whole community's gathering around listening to what's going on in the home. I think we had a very repentant child right then. One who realized I'm moments away from dying. And I probably got one more chance, don't you think? But in essence, that's often what happens in our society. The cops show up and they say to the teenage kid, your dad said you kicked a hole in the wall and you slapped your mother, and, I'm going to have to take you out of this house. Well, where would I go? Well, you're going to go down into the system until we can find a place for you to be in somebody's house somewhere. If there's a foster parent will take you in, or some group home, or some youth group or something. And I guarantee you it's nothing as good as what you have here. But if that's where you want to do, that's where you're going to go. And sometimes we have to do that. But anyway, I think this is a much better system. I really do. I would take a note here, too, that one of the things you see in every declining society is where the younger generation has no respect for the older generation, whether that's their parents or whether that's just old people. I grew up in a society, we revered older people. When an old person wanted to tell you about when they were in World War II, you listened and you showed respect. You didn't interrupt, you showed. Today, that's not the case. We are just simply in the way. There's too many of us. You're drinking too much water, you're eating too much food, and you're driving too slow. Get out of my way. And what's happening now is we're getting this traction. It's all over Europe. They are perfecting euthanizing older people. Have you seen some of the things they've created? They got this one that looks like a big egg in Germany now, and it's a company that's become a billion-dollar company making ways to euthanize senior citizens. And there's a lady in Canada that just wanted a new wheelchair. Did you guys hear about this one? It was all over the news. You can look it up on YouTube. And she asked for like 8 years. And so finally she's distraught and she calls the line saying, please help me get a new wheelchair, because it's free in Canada, right? Healthcare is free in Canada. And they kept putting her to the line of how to be euthanized. And the lady would say, well, you don't really need a new wheelchair. Have you thought about getting euthanized? Let me explain this to you. And they kept putting her to that. She couldn't get a wheelchair, but she did know how to be euthanized. Just a couple of forms, and you're out of your pain. You don't need a new wheelchair. You need to die. And it's going to just seem as, just like abortion. Right over here, there's one in your neighborhood. Just walk right in and walk right out. We'll take care of you, no problem at all. Well, this is great. Just let your family know next Tuesday will be your last day on earth. No problem. This is what we are seeing. Well, I didn't think we'd get through the whole night tonight, but we will stop there and, try to go quicker next time. If you guys quit asking so many questions, it would go quicker. Any questions?